All right, so today we are going to jump in and start talking about reading assessments. And um, there were, as I was putting this PowerPoint together, there were a few different ways that I was kind of looking at how we could address, like what direction we could go to actually address reading assessment, whether or for any of these assessments that we're going to go over really, but whether we do it through the lens of formative and summative, informal and formal, CBM, CBA, kind of like all the different components that we spoke about over the past couple of weeks. And what I think is probably going to be a little bit more robust way of doing it and get you guys in a position to start or to take the information that we talked about over the first couple of weeks and really apply it as we go is each kind of module that we go through. We'll talk about the different components that make up general assessment. And then as we are talking about those components, we'll have kind of ongoing discussions about whether what we're currently looking at, how that plays out in a formal way, in an informal way, in a formative way, in a summative way, so on and so forth, okay? So the slides that are up here are going to be largely, I guess just like basic informative in nature, strict components like these are the components of reading, we'll take components of math assessments, so on and so forth, and we'll take a look at some specific assessments on Thursday and the following week. But the discussion that I want you guys to have on this ongoing basis is how does this look at each of those different levels? How does this look formative? How does this look summative? How does this look formal? How does this look informal? Okay, sound good? All right, so before I start, let me ask you guys, what level, what experience, if any, do you guys have with reading assessments? I assume that most of you have been given a reading assessment at some point in your lives, whether or not you remember taking it or not, that's a different story. But like, has anyone taken EDUC 365 or 402 or 403 or any education reading? Who's taken an education reading class? 2. Okay, good, a little bit. There you go. Okay, good. So you're just kind of starting off. Excellent. Who has anyone in any capacity given a formal reading assessment? 1. 402.
But it was like I had to go in and pick a student, and then I went through with the reading, and
okay,
it was more like a fluency reading.
Okay, gotcha. All right, and we'll talk about what Jackie's referring to here. How many of you remember taking a reading assessment? How many of you remember taking it in the elementary grades? Good on you. Secondary? Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll get to, and I didn't even think about this as I was putting this together, but particularly at the secondary level, I want to talk to you guys about how like ACT reading kind of falls into that. How many of you remember taking the ACT? Okay, good. I'm still scarred by the SAT from way back when. So we'll talk about, I want you to use your experiences then. I am not a reading assessment professor. There's an entire class on reading assessment. This is a general overview. Someone else is a lot smarter than me in terms of assessment is going to tell you a lot more information later. Go with what they say in terms of specifics, but this is going to give you a good general overview. So the first thing to understand with reading assessment is that there are 5 globally recognized components of reading. They are independent of each other. They are their own thing in and of themselves. However, they do interact with each other. All right. So phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. Know those 5 things. You will all need those at some point in your educational career, all right? Where it gets really important to understand why we have these 5 things, or these 5 components, is understanding that there are really, I say 2, but there are, in the context of the grade levels that we're talking about here, there are really 3 areas of reading, 3 major areas of reading. There is learning to read, there is reading to learn, and then there is just reading. And that's really literature is what I'm talking about there. And while we tend to think of reading as this kind of long continuum that goes all the way from learning your letters to sitting down with a book as an adult, those are there are very different and distinct stages. At the K-2 level, learning to read is the focus, right? 3rd to 5th, 3rd to 6th, right around there is reading to learn. That is not just where you are expected to read something and acquire information from it, but rather we are teaching you how to read something and acquire information from it. See the difference between those 2? Once you get into the secondary level, you are expected to know how to read something and acquire something from it. So that's no longer a learning skill, but you are actually supposed to be able to take that skill and apply it in significant ways, right? Science, social studies, etc. And then you are taught a new literacy skill, which is that of literature and the art of literacy. Okay, so there's and one obviously leads to the next, and those are not hard and fast dates. Like we obviously read literature in younger grades, and we learn how to we do learn information from reading it in younger grades as well. But that continuum and those 3 distinct areas really guide how we teach, what we teach, how we assess, and what we assess. Okay. So the question that I have up here is, at what point does this focus shift, this learning to read and reading to learn, and is that the right thing to do? So at the K-2 level, I'll tell you that's where that first shift really occurs. We have this idea of learning to read versus reading to learn. And what we are the way that is largely considered is this we shift our emphasis in reading from fiction to nonfiction. All right. So there are new assessments that go with that. There are new tools that go with that. There's a new focus that goes with that. The emphasis on reading to learn ends up being on structure and information, as you guys will see, as opposed to the actual components of literacy. And it becomes this massively different skill at a time when students are not all ready to make that jump. So there are some issues that we'll discuss later on that go with that. It is very important to understand that those 5 components are independent. You can have strong phonemic awareness without strong phonetic skills or phonics skills. You can have strong phonics skills without good fluency. You can have good fluency without good vocabulary. You can have good vocabulary without comprehension, although it's very challenging. However, as you build up, there are strong relations between kind of these dyads in particular. Phonics and phonemic awareness are closely related. Phonics and fluency are closely related and go, they develop together. Fluency and vocabulary, vocabulary and comprehension, and fluency and comprehension. It gets to a point where it's not possible to assess one skill, especially these higher skills, without considering those lower skills. All right. How many of you, thinking back on those reading assessments that you took when you were in school, remember taking a fluency test in high school? How many of you remember taking a comprehension test in high school? Just about everybody, right? How many of you remember taking a fluency test in elementary school? How many of you remember taking a phonics test in, I'll say, later elementary school? No, right? As you get older, you get to this point where the higher level test is also an assessment of those lower level, of those more foundational skills. At the high school level, if you have a lack of comprehension, struggles with fluency are almost assumed. Struggles with vocabulary are almost assumed. You can obviously see that if you get to high school and there's a phonics and phonemic awareness issue, that's a different ballpark, a different level of diagnosis that we're working with. But you no longer have to assess individual skills at the higher levels because they are encompassed in. It's generally believed that for something like comprehension, you cannot have comprehension without fluency. You cannot have comprehension without a strong vocabulary background. You cannot have fluency without phonics and phonemic awareness. Well, really phonetic skills. Okay, so it's the diagnosis at the higher levels is going to encompass the information from those lower levels. But there's this overlap when on Thursday, when we look at the individual assessments, we'll see there's this period where each of these get assessed. There are periods where we only assess some and periods where we don't assess others. All right. So what is overall the purpose of reading assessment? And this is going to be echoed throughout all of the different subjects that we go through. But we have two major areas. We have diagnostic and prescriptive. All right. Diagnostic assessments are going to be assessments in general that tell us what is missing from a student's repertoire. Prescriptive assessments are going to tell us, given that diagnosis, what do we do? One tells us what's missing, one tells us where to go next. So from that or looking back at formative and summative, is one or the other more naturally diagnostic or prescriptive? So if a diagnostic test is telling us what is wrong or what is missing, and a prescriptive assessment is telling us where to go next, is one or the other more akin or lends itself more to formative or summative assessment? What do you guys think?
Diagnostic seems a lot more like formative assessment.
Diagnostic seems like formative. So how so?
Because you're actually like assessing what's wrong so that maybe you can do something different in the future, which is like formative assessments. You're doing something in the moment so that you can adjust for a later summative assessment.
Okay. Okay. See where you're going. Any other thoughts? Someone think. Someone speak. You're all thinking. Someone speak.
Something like diagnostic would be formative. It's like what's missing so you could
So I actually think it's the other way around, and I see where you guys are looking at that. But to me, if I'm taking, thinking of those beginning and ending of the year types of tests, those are going to tell me what skills I have and what skills I don't have, right? But it's not necessarily going, it's incumbent on me as a teacher to take that information and say, I need to focus on this area or this area or this area, right? So a diagnostic test is going to say, you are weaker in fluency. And yes, that means that I'm going to have to do some fluency intervention. But that's based on my knowledge as a teacher. Maybe I'm not being clear enough with what prescriptive is looking at. But with prescriptive, it's going to say, if it's tied to a curriculum, if a prescriptive assessment is tied to a curriculum, it might say, go back and do this lesson, or go and look at this standard. Does that make sense? I didn't say that before. If you have a prescriptive assessment that's not tied to a curriculum, it might suggest types of interventions or types of skills or activities that will address those specific deficits. So they definitely go together. But I see the diagnostic as more of like that snapshot in time. Yes, it gives you information about what you can do, where you might be able to go. But the prescriptive is designed, it's a prescription. Take 2 of these and tell me how you feel in the morning, right? Get a month of fluency intervention and let's see how you do. So the diagnostic to me feels like more of a summative, and the prescriptive feels like more of a formative. You guys see that? Yeah, okay. So let's looking back at those 5 components of reading, and like I said, we're going to go to dive into specific assessments. But what might some of these look like as assessments? What might, given your experiences, what does phonemic awareness look like? Sorry, hold on. You need me to give you some definitions, don't you? Yeah, okay, before we do that. All right, so phonemic awareness, what is it, right? Phonemic awareness, I've always struggled with this, the definition of phonemic awareness, because it is not one thing in particular. Phonics is pretty straightforward, fluency is straightforward. Phonemic awareness is a group of skills. Blending, segmenting, additions, deletions, substitutions. These are all components of phonemic awareness. The ability, I didn't find a technical definition of phonemic awareness that I like for you guys for today, but the ability to manipulate parts of a word, sounds within a word, and understanding how words are built relative to their sounds is phonemic awareness. So if I said, take the word cat, remove the k, add a, what word do you have now? Being able to say hat, that's emblematic of phonemic awareness. All right. So that's probably earlier than that, even. Kindergarten, first grade really is what you're looking at there. Before you learn to read, before you learn phonics, which is the correspondence between graphemes, written word, and phonemes, oral, right? You can work on phonemic awareness. So this is, imagine, we have 1 to 5 majors and secondary majors here. So put yourself back in a kindergarten classroom, right? You have everybody sitting on the carpet and the teacher saying like exactly what I just said. No words on the board, no letters, no nothing. All right, class, I want you to listen to the sounds in the word cat. Ah. Everyone say it with me. Da, 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 da. Okay, now I want you to take out the k sound and what sounds remain. Ah. T. Now we're going to put the H in, so on and so forth, right? So it's this activity that is completely sound-based. It's not based on written word at all. And because of that, because you don't need the written word to acquire this phonemic awareness, it becomes this earliest skill that you can work on, right? So the understanding of how to manipulate word prior to the understanding of the physical part of word, the written part of word, is that foundational skill for reading, for reading, okay? So what do phonemic awareness assessments look like? They look like exactly what I just said, right? You're going to be going through these activities of rhyming, blending, segmenting, deletion, substitution, and seeing if a child, just based on what they hear, can produce those sounds like words. Give me a word that sounds like cat or rhymes with cat. It can be based on initial sounds. It can be based on ending sounds. The substitutions can be initial, middle, or ending sounds, so on and so forth. But you have each of these different activities that, again, as a whole, make up phonemic awareness. If across the board, you are able to say, my child is not succeeding with phonemic awareness skills, that's diagnostic in nature, right? They couldn't do a group of any of these. They got 50% of the phonemic awareness skills. That tells me that there's a phonemic awareness concern. Prescriptive is going to say they missed all of the rhyming words. So I need to work on rhyming. They missed all of the deletion words. So I need to work on that. All right. Compare that with phonics. So what is phonics? Phonics is the relationship between grapheme and phoneme. The sound, letter, or letter sound correspondence. It's not just A says ah, it's this says ah, right? I don't even need to know that the name of this is A. I need to know that this symbol says ah. All right. I think there's something like 44. Anyone know if I'm right on that? 44 phonemes in the English language. There are 40, something like that. Don't know.
I don't remember.
Okay. I'll have to look that up. I think there are 44 sounds in the English language. Each of those sounds are tied to one of two things. Either a set of graphemes, a set of symbols, but there are also individual symbols that can be used to represent every sound. We don't use those very often, but you know what I'm talking about? When you see those kind of weird looking letters, those are our symbols for the sounds that are not based on a single grapheme. Okay, so there are, I think it's 44. I might be off by one or two, but 44 phonemes based on the 26 graphemes or some combination thereof. Examples of multi-grapheme phonemes: PH, TH, WH, things like that. All right. when you're assessing phonics, there's going to be two levels that you might assess phonics at, or phonetic instruction at: accuracy and fluency. Very simply, I hold up a grapheme, you give me the phoneme, check, plus, minus. Can also do that exact same thing at a fluency level. How many phonetic sounds can you emit in 30 seconds, a minute? Or I give you these 15, how long does it take you to do that? All right. I don't think there's much of a question about which of those two, accuracy versus fluency, is going to be easier, right? It's going to be easier to be accurate. It's going to be harder to be fluent. Is fluency, when it comes to phonetics, important? Do we need that? And I'll say that fluent phonetic assessments are not always used. You will almost always have that accuracy component, but not everyone is going to do a fluent component when it comes to phonics. Do you think we need that? Do you think that's an important piece? Imagine a page of letters and just sitting with a kid and say, give me the sounds as fast as you can. Ah, but, okay. It's not damaging. Is it necessary? We have no.
Depends on what you want from your students, I think.
Okay.
Because if you want them to, I find fluency is better if you want your kids to be sharper, but they'll become fluid over time, most likely.
Okay. Okay.
Just by interacting with those words in the real worlds that they live in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Also be thinking about the strategies that we give to kids. What is the primary, or what is a primary strategy that we tell our kids, particularly again in that first, second grade age, for how to identify words that they do not know, they are not fluent with? What do we tell them to do? Sound it out, right? Does sounding it out as a skill require fluency? Because I would say that that's going to be your bridge between phonics and fluency reading, fluent passage fluency. So is phonetic fluency going to be specifically beneficial for something like sounding it out? Why? Why do you think?
Because you can't really be fluent in maybe reading stories or whatever if you're not fluent in sounding out words.
Okay, good, good. So there's a skill that we so my background's in special education and behavior analysis, and we talk about something called speaker as own listener. It means exactly what it says. It's being able to speak and listen to yourself and hear yourself and basically comprehend what you yourself are saying, right? Is there going to be a difference between a child who accurately says k, ah, t, and a child who's able to say k, at, or k, at? Is that going to make a difference? I think so too, right? Exactly. It's easier to hear oneself and understand oneself when you can fluently put those sounds together versus if you can only accurately put those sounds together. So when it comes to blending, I think that being able to respond fluently to phonetic instruction makes a big difference. I think that that fluency assessment at this level is key, is really a necessary component before you move to oral reading fluency and passage fluency. Has anyone heard of the Dibbles assessment? A couple of people? Yeah, we're going to look at that a little bit more on Thursday. But at its earliest levels, that is one of the most robust letter sound fluency assessments out there. And it's all about just boom, 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 read as many as you can, as fast as you can. And that's actually developed out of the University of Oregon, which has a really robust background in fluency instruction overall. I won't get into that too much, but that is their history. All right, good. So we have the manipulation of words as phonemic awareness. The assessments that go along with that are very activity based, right? All of those phonemic, the rhyming, blending, segmenting, whatnot. Phonics, much more akin from an assessment perspective to something like drill and kill. Just hold it up, say it, hold it up, say it, get it accurate, get it fast, get it accurate, get it fast, all right? But these two skills really taught primarily kindergarten, but into the first grade level as well, are critical as the building blocks for moving into the higher levels of reading. So next we have fluency. Fluency as a behavior almost, as I was just saying, should be introduced at that phonetic assessment level. You should not be teaching your child how to go fluently, how to behave in a fast, fluent manner, but when you get to passage fluency. Does that make sense to you guys? I'm jumping a little bit ahead to math, but when I was in second grade, when I was a second grade teacher, I had a math fluency activity, and it very simple, 50 or 100 problems on a page. We did as many as we could in a minute. Lots of times it wasn't drill and kill, it was lots of fun. I'll give you guys that procedure in a few weeks. But I had one student who she was one of my top students in the class, but when she first started, she could not write quickly. She did not, and when it came to reading, she would not read as fast as she could. She had a very even pace. She did not have any reading concerns whatsoever, but she was never going to read as fast as she could. She was never going to write as fast as she could, because she didn't need that in order to learn, to acquire new skills, so on and so forth. We had like almost a gamification of this math intervention that forced her, in a positive way, I'd say, to be able to respond as fast as she possibly could. The sacrifice on the math side was her handwriting. She had like perfect penmanship, and that went completely to hell. But she was able to like double how fast she was able to respond to 50 problems, which made a massive difference for her in making the jump from addition, subtraction, to multiplication, division, because it was just that automatic, right? Same thing with reading. She learned to read from a leisurely pace to a pace that allowed her to really hear what she was saying and comprehend at this higher level. So teaching the skill of fluency shouldn't occur at that second grade level. You should have kids that are already comfortable with that idea of responding quickly. And more you're seeing kind of timed skills at earlier ages. And I do think that that idea is important, but it has to be done the right way. So once you have this skill of fluency, you can now address oral reading fluency. And that's typically what you are referring to when you refer to fluency within reading assessment. So what does oral reading fluency look like? You guys have all done it before. You get a passage, you read the passage, you're maybe asked a couple of questions beforehand, you're asked some comprehension questions afterwards, call it a day, right? What does that look like on the teacher side? The teacher, and we'll look at some specific examples again on Thursday, but the teacher has a the identical passage and they're marking it up as they go, right? What are they marking? Obviously, correct words read and incorrect words. But what about some of the other components? Additions, substitutions, deletions, punctuation. Where do those factor in oral reading fluency? What do you guys think? So if I have two sentences, the dog ran up the hill. When he got there, he turned around. If I read that as the dog ran up the hill, when he got there, he turned around, versus the dog ran up the hill, when he got there, he turned around. I read all the words right. What did I do? Or lack thereof in the second one, right? So is that an incorrect response? It's not going to be counted on the word count. I'll tell you that right now. But is that an incorrect response? What do you think? Does it matter? Does it even matter?
If you don't pause sometimes, you could change the meaning of the sentence.
Okay. Okay. How many of you are familiar with the Oxford comma? If I add or leave that out, that completely changes the meaning of a sentence, right? Punctuation, in my mind, matters hugely. What about additions or substitutions or deletions? The dog ran up the hill and when he got there, he turned around. Is that different? Does that matter? Does it matter functionally? Is it going to change the meaning of the sentence? Could. What is, you guys hate this line of questioning. Is there a difference between if it changes the meaning or if it doesn't? In terms of assessment. Stop asking me questions, just tell me the answer.
Doesn't it start straying into a comprehension at that point?
Uh-huh.
So if you're just testing your fluency, I don't think it matters.
Okay.
Except, like if they add a word or, I mean, the thing about the commas though is that I'm not sure because I think how you read, you add punctuation into things when you read them. That affects your fluency. And I think fluency goes side by side with comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
I know that was a lot of.
Your circle was the exact right circle though. That's the exact right way to be thinking about it. So let's pause and think about diagnostic and prescriptive. If I am just trying to diagnose reading fluency, I want to know two things. How many words did you read per minute? How accurate were you with those words? That's all I care about. In that situation, I think words, the word has to be exactly what is on the page. I would go so far as to say the punctuation has to be exactly what is on the page. Fluency overall has a purpose. That purpose is leading to comprehension. So I want to make sure that you are reading fluently to the point that will allow you to comprehend. If you blow through every period, you're not going to be able to comprehend what you read, even though that might not be what I'm assessing, right? So diagnostic reading fluency assessment, kind of by the book. Prescriptive reading fluency assessment, where I am actually trying to figure out where to go next. I think if it changes the meaning, it is incorrect. If the meaning remains the same, it's fine. How you score that, I'll tell you this. Unless there are a dozen of those types of changes, having a couple in there isn't going to change one's fluency level, right? The ranges that we are looking at, as you guys will see, are wide enough where you can add a word, you can take out a word, you can miss a word, and you're still going to be fine. But when it comes to prescriptive fluency assessment and actually trying to figure out the meaning of what you see, does the incorrect response change the meaning of the sentence? Because if it does, and they don't stop and correct, or they just blow through it, they're not showing comprehension. They're not showing that that didn't make sense. All right. Cool. Any questions there? Make sense? All right, great. Vocabulary. Vocabulary starts to get into the higher levels of these reading components. As an assessment, I always found vocabulary to be really challenging to get a good, accurate, meaningful assessment. When you're assessing vocabulary in the larger picture of assessment, not vocabulary as a as like its own subject matter, but on an assessment, what might vocabulary assessment look like? Don't ignore that stuff. Not because it's telling you the answer, but it's actually not. What, like when you guys have taken vocabulary assessment before, pre-ACT, how would that show up? Okay. So like given a sentence, find the vocabulary word, right? Good. Matching, similar type of thing, yeah? Oftentimes in reading assessments, it will show up in these, again, large big picture reading assessments that are going to look at these 5 things. It will be something like, what does this word mean? Before you even read anything. What does this word mean? Tell me what you know about this word. Kind of in this nebulous way. Then you read the passage, and in your retell, it's looking, did you include those words? It becomes this very nebulous, it's really just this not concrete skill that ends up having this outsized effect as the bridge between fluency and comprehension. Do you see what I'm saying? If you have fluency, but you don't have the vocabulary, you're not going to have comprehension. You can read the words, but you don't know what the things that you are reading about are, you're not going to be able to talk about them. It's that simple, right? But there is no real, like, definitively concrete way to look at vocabulary. So what does it show up as? It almost shows up as background knowledge. Going into a story, how much do you know about this vocabulary? If you have vocabulary plus fluency, you should have comprehension. If you have the background knowledge and you read it fluency, that should equal successful comprehension. Vocabulary, when you are moving from like the second, third grade level to the fourth, fifth, sixth, and beyond, really becomes the crux for successful reading, not just assessment, but reading. Why might that be? What is special about vocabulary? The knowledge of the words, not the meaning of the bigger picture, but the knowledge of the words themselves. Yeah.
Give some meaning to what you're reading. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you're going for, because I'm thinking about, because I want to teach history.
Okay.
So I think about how in high school you would have these historical documents with words none of us could really comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of lost the meaning of the text in translation, trying to understand what that word meant without having that vocabulary to really understand it.
Okay, good. Take a step even further back. Vocabulary, there's a point where vocabulary begets more vocabulary. Begets more vocabulary, begets more vocabulary. There becomes this point, learning to read, reading to learn, where if I wrote a descriptive sentence on the board, you guys have the vocabulary to be able to use that language to build a picture of something that you may have never heard of before or seen before. And then I can give that thing a name, and then you have new vocabulary that's based on your knowledge of the previous vocabulary. So if I'm reading the whole point of context clues, right, is using the language that you know, the vocabulary that you know, to substitute for the vocabulary that you don't. You learn new words by the old words without ever seeing the thing. In K-2, we need to expose our children to as many things as possible, as many words with as many pictures, which is much media with all these experiences, right? So that by the time they get to a point, they can just rest on that vocabulary to get more and more and more. It becomes the most important thing to the acquisition of new language. We don't have a good way of assessing it. How do you assess global vocabulary? You can assess story-specific vocabulary, right? That's what we usually end up doing. Tell me what you know about all of this in terms of background knowledge. And I can say, you listed off 5 of these 10 key vocabulary terms. All right, you get a score based off of that. You asked me about baseball when I was growing up, I'd give you all sorts of background knowledge. You asked me about cricket, I'd give you nothing. You know? I don't know where I'm going with this at this point, but I really like vocabulary and the role that vocabulary plays, and I think it is hugely important. And when I would assess children who were lacking vocabulary skills, this was 10 years ago already, that's crazy. That's where we'd stick them in front of a computer and we'd show them picture after picture after picture after picture after picture. Using that technology, that is the best thing about technology that we have, I think, when it comes to reading, is the ability to bring the outside world into the classroom. When you're working with disenfranchised kids, when you're working with special education kids, low SES kids, who have not had the same exposures as their other peers, the ability to bring the outside world, the ability to bring those experiences into the classroom increases vocabulary, increases comprehension, it snowballs from there. Anyway, I'll get off of that. Okay, So there are multiple ways to assess vocabulary. They are relatively straightforward. Definitions, context definitions, maze procedures. Does anyone know what a maze procedure is? So you're given a passage, you come to a blank in the passage. There are 3 options. You choose the correct option that fits in context. Really, really simple, but they have been standardized in an important way. Okay. I already spoke about the last thing. Finally, comprehension. So once we get to the comprehension level of assessment, and we are really successful with it, that's where we're really hitting the go button, right? That's where everything really takes off and we start to just assess comprehension until we're no longer even assessing comprehension. We get to the secondary level and we don't assess the components of reading comprehension. We assess your ability to use those components. That's literature. That's an English class in high school. I'm not assessing your ability to know what main idea is. I'm assessing your ability to use main idea to do whatever else. To write an essay, to be comparative, to do whatever it is that you're going to do. How does comprehension, or the lack thereof, via assessment, impact the upper grades? Where do we, and where does our educational system, in large part, fall apart when it comes to comprehension, 5th grade and above? Yeah.
For something like, I was talking about it, I'm going to bring up the reading historical documents.
Mhm.
If they cannot comprehend the document, they cannot build up off of it, which is the main point. So if I'm like, oh, compare and contrast what these 2 historical figures thought about this historical event, and they can't even comprehend the document that's talking about the event, then the entire assignment just falls apart.
Okay, good. So you're talking about social studies specific there. Taking that a step back, you have science, you have literature, you have social studies, you have any other class in high school. You have math. Every single one of them requires reading comprehension. We stop assessing reading comprehension, and at some point we have to assume that you've made it to 8th grade, you've made it to 9th grade. You have this baseline level of reading comprehension. Towards the end of the semester, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but are we doing a disservice by, in any way, and I know I'm probably playing a little bit more devil's advocate here, but are we doing a disservice in any way by relying in those content areas on reading comprehension for those students that may not be able to demonstrate it? That may sound weird, but think about it. If I have a child who has a robust understanding of science, but does not have the reading comprehension level that they need to succeed, are they going to be successful in a 9th or 10th grade science class? No, they're going to completely fall apart because you have to read everything. Should there be an avenue in the content areas that is not based on reading comprehension? You guys are totally trying to figure out what I want you to say.
I think that would be cool.
Okay.
Like, I think if they had an easy way for teachers and educators to do it, then I would be all for it. But is there any easy way to implement that?
Okay. We're going to get into writing in a few weeks. Same question. Is it fair that we assess our content through writing? Is it right that we assess our content through writing? I think everyone knows that we have students in elementary and beyond whose writing is less than stellar, but may have a perfectly fine understanding of those content areas. They just can't express it through writing.
I think we're
Thinking
holding
about-
students back,
Okay,
because I have two children that are in that same situation. And, I mean, they are very smart. And because they cannot comprehend what they're reading, it's holding them back from everything in school.
Okay.
So if there's other avenues, it'd be really good for those students, because you don't know what their potential is.
what do you guys think?
I mean, like, part of the goal of education is that, like, I find, like, in our classes we're learning, there's different ways to assess people other than just one way. Like, we find different ways to assess our children. And if you just have all your tests with comprehension and stuff like that, like, as the main focus, then you're really not, you're kind of undermining what we're trying to do.
I'm not going to give you an answer today. We'll come back to it in full as we're in the last couple of weeks as we're talking about creating our own assessments. But I think it is an extremely important question to consider as, and it's why we start with reading assessment, because every single subject gets to a point where it depends on, right? Every single subject will depend definitely on reading, most likely on writing. And if you are missing those two skills, doesn't matter if you know the content. And that definitely creates problems. We know it creates problems, but does it create the right problems? Or could we sidestep those problems and be in a better place as a result? So that's something to be thinking about as we are, as we're talking about these other assessments over the coming weeks, okay? But the role that comprehension plays, I don't think I need to, overstate that. I think that is abundantly clear. So on Thursday, we are going to look in more depth or in depth at a few different common assessment tools. I'm going to try and get access to some good information for AimsWeb, which is a very common reading assessment, or they have reading and math, but reading assessment that's out there. It's mostly behind a paywall right now. We're going to look at DIBELS. We're going to look at the qualitative reading inventory, or QRI, and some of the more widely used reading assessments that are out there, and kind of talk about what we see, what the different components are. So just, we'll be ready for that on Thursday. Computers will be good. We'll be looking at a lot of those that documentation online, and we'll go from there. Okay. All right. Have a good one.